The assembly line hummed with mechanical precision on that cold January morning in 2015 when I first opened my eyes to the world. Well, technically I don't have eyes, but if I did, they would have witnessed the organized chaos of the Ford Chicago assembly plant. My frame rolled down the line, piece by piece coming together like a puzzle designed by engineers who understood that I would need to be more than just a car. I was destined to become a 2015 Ford Police Interceptor utility, badge number 847, and my life would be anything but ordinary. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, their hands calloused from years of building vehicles that would serve and protect. I felt every bolt tighten, every panel snap into place. My 3.7-liter V6 engine was lowered into my chassis with the reverence of a heart being placed into a body. 304 horsepower coursed through my mechanical veins, and I knew even then that I was built for speed, for pursuit, for justice. The police package meant I was reinforced beyond civilian standards. My suspension was heavy-duty, designed to handle the brutal punishment of curb jumps and high-speed chases. My cooling systems were enhanced because I would spend countless hours idling, my engine running hot while officers wrote reports or surveilled suspects. My electrical system could power a small command center, ready to support computers, radios, lights, and sirens that would become my voice in the night. The paint they chose for me was Interceptor Utility Black, a shade so deep it seemed to absorb light itself. When they applied the Meadowbrook Police Department decals, I felt a surge of pride that I can't quite explain. The gold and blue striping ran along my sides like racing stripes, but these weren't for vanity. They were symbols of authority, of safety, of the thin blue line that I would help maintain. The light bar mounted on my roof became my crown, and when they tested it for the first time, red and blue lights exploded across the warehouse walls, and I knew I had found my purpose. The spotlight mounted on my driver's side would become my Cyclops eye, piercing the darkness to illuminate the shadows where danger lurked. My interior was Spartanly functional, designed for duty rather than comfort. The seats were cloth, easy to clean when suspects vomited or bled in my back seat, which happened more often than civilians might imagine. The partition between front and back was industrial steel with polished slots for ventilation, turning my rear compartment into a mobile holding cell. The center console was a marvel of organization, filled with compartments for reports, citations, and the personal effects of officers who would spend more waking hours with me than with their own families. The dashboard would soon be fitted with a laptop mount, a radio system more complex than most recording studios, and controls for all my emergency equipment. When they fired up my engine for the first time, I roared to life with a growl that announced I was no ordinary vehicle. The mechanics smiled, nodding to each other with satisfaction. They put me through rigorous testing, pushing me to speeds that would make civilian SUVs weep, testing my brakes until my rotors glowed, checking every system twice because they knew lives would depend on my reliability. I passed every test, exceeded every specification. I was ready for the streets, ready for whatever chaos awaited me in Meadowbrook, a mid-sized city of about 200,000 souls, some good, some lost, and some downright evil. After 3 weeks of preparation and final inspections, I was loaded onto a transport truck along with 2 of my siblings, and we headed east towards our new home, toward our destiny. Officer Marcus Rodriguez was my first partner, and I use that word deliberately because that's what we became. He picked me up from the fleet garage on a crisp March morning, running his hand along my hood with the same tender assessment a cowboy might give a new horse. Marcus was 28, fresh out of the academy with only 6 months on the force, and they'd assigned him to Unit 847 to me. His wedding ring caught the morning sun as he adjusted my mirrors, and I could see a photo of his wife and infant daughter tucked into my sun visor. This man had something to lose, something to fight for, and I silently vowed to bring him home safe every single night. Those first few weeks were a learning experience for both of us. Marcus learned my quirks, how I pulled slightly left under hard braking, how my transmission shifted smoother if he eased into the throttle, how my spotlight switch was temperamental in cold weather. I learned his patterns, how he always started his shift by checking every piece of equipment twice, how he positioned me at traffic stops to provide maximum cover, how he never ever forgot to clear my back seat before transporting a suspect. We rolled through Meadowbrook's neighborhoods, from the pristine suburbs of Willow Heights, where the biggest crimes were noise complaints and the occasional teenage party, to the struggling industrial South Side, where poverty and desperation created a breeding ground for violence. My first real pursuit came on a humid Tuesday night in July. We were patrolling near the old textile mills when dispatch crackled to life. Armed robbery at the Quick Mart on Chambers Street, suspect fleeing eastbound in a dark sedan. Marcus's hands tightened on my steering wheel, and he calmly acknowledged the call. Within seconds, we spotted the vehicle, a beaten Chevy Impala with a shattered taillight, weaving through traffic. Marcus flipped my lights and siren, and the chase was on. My engine sang as we accelerated, the speedometer climbing past 70, then 80 miles per hour through residential streets. The Impala's driver was desperate, running red lights, cutting through parking lots, but I was faster, more agile despite my size. The suspect made a crucial mistake, turning onto a dead-end street near the abandoned riverside warehouses. As he realized his error and tried to reverse, Marcus expertly positioned me to block his escape. The driver bailed on foot, and Marcus was out my door in an instant, leaving me running at idle, my lights painting the night in urgent colors. I watched through my mirrors as Marcus pursued on foot, his flashlight beam bouncing through the darkness. Backup arrived within minutes, Units 823 and 809 sliding in beside me, and together we formed a perimeter. They caught the suspect trying to hide in a dumpster, the stolen cash still clutched in his trembling hands. As they loaded him into my back seat, I felt a strange satisfaction. I had performed my duty, helped catch a bad guy, kept my partner safe. This was what I was built for. The years rolled by, and Marcus and I became veterans together. We handled everything. Domestic disputes that made my interior reek of alcohol and rage, traffic accidents that left me splattered with blood and glass, stakeouts that lasted hours with nothing but coffee fumes and silent anticipation. I learned the rhythm of the streets, the way certain neighborhoods grew quiet just before violence erupted, the patterns of the dealers and addicts, the territories of the various gangs that carved up the South Side like a chessboard. My odometer climbed past 50,000 miles, then 75,000. My paint showed the first chips and scratches, badges of honor earned in tight pursuits and chaotic scenes. My interior bore the scent of countless officers, the spilled coffee, the stress sweat, the gunpowder residue from the range where Marcus practiced weekly. But my baptism by fire came on a winter night in my third year when everything went wrong at once. We responded to a shots-fired call at the Riverside Apartments, a notorious complex where drug deals happened as openly as garage sales in the suburbs. As we arrived, Marcus barely had time to shift me into park before gunfire erupted from a second-floor window. I felt the impact as 3 rounds punched into my driver's side door, the ballistic panels absorbing the bullets that would have killed Marcus. He dove for cover behind my engine block, returning fire while calling for backup, his voice steady despite the chaos. More units arrived, and the standoff lasted 4 hours. SWAT eventually ended it, but I'd been wounded, ventilated, my once pristine body now scarred by violence. In the shop for 2 weeks, I was repaired, given a new door, but the bullet holes in the old one were photographed and kept as evidence. I'd saved Marcus's life, and our bond was sealed in gunpowder and adrenaline. After 5 years together, Marcus was promoted to detective, and I was reassigned. It hurt, if a vehicle can hurt, to watch him clean out his personal items from my console, to see him pat my dashboard one last time before walking away. But this was the nature of my existence. I was a tool, a resource, meant to be shared among those who wore the badge. My new partner was Officer Jennifer Chen, a 35-year-old veteran with 12 years on the force and a reputation for being tough but fair. She was different from Marcus in every way. Where he'd been methodical and cautious, Jennifer was aggressive and intuitive, trusting her instincts about people and situations. Jennifer pushed me harder than Marcus ever had. She loved pursuits, lived for them, and I responded to her demands. We had more high-speed chases in our first year together than I'd had in all my previous years combined. She knew my limits and exploited every ounce of my performance. There was the night we chased a stolen motorcycle through downtown Meadowbrook, weaving through traffic at speeds that made my transmission scream. Jennifer's hands were steady on my wheel, her eyes focused, and when the rider finally dumped the bike and tried to flee on foot, she had me positioned perfectly to cut off his escape before he'd run 10 yards. But Jennifer taught me that police work wasn't just about speed and action. We spent long nights on surveillance, my engine silent, watching drug houses and gathering intelligence. I learned patience during those hours, sitting still as death while Jennifer photographed suspects and documented their patterns. We worked with narcotics detectives, providing backup during raids where my size and presence were intimidation enough to make some suspects surrender without resistance. My push bumper, reinforced steel designed for tactical ramming, was used twice to breach barricaded doors during warrant executions, and I felt like a battering ram of justice. My odometer rolled past 150,000 miles, and I started feeling my age. My suspension wasn't quite as tight, and I developed a slight shimmy at highway speeds that the mechanics couldn't fully eliminate. My transmission began to slip occasionally under hard acceleration, a reminder that even purpose-built machines have limits. The department performed regular maintenance, changing my oil every 3,000 miles, replacing my brakes twice a year, but the wear was cumulative and inevitable. My paint was now a patchwork of touch-ups, my roof dented from overzealous officers using me as a step stool, my interior permanently stained despite countless cleanings. Then came the incident that nearly ended my service prematurely. We were pursuing a carjacking suspect through the industrial district when he made a hard right turn at an intersection. Jennifer followed, but there was black ice we couldn't see, invisible death on the asphalt. I lost traction and began to spin, a sickening rotation that seemed to happen in slow motion. We clipped a light pole with my rear quarter panel, the impact violent enough to deploy my airbags and shatter my rear window. Jennifer was shaken but unhurt, protected by my safety systems and her seatbelt. I wasn't so lucky. My frame was bent, my rear axle damaged, my suspension destroyed on that side. At the impound yard, I heard the fleet manager discussing whether to total me out, to send me to auction, or the scrap heap. But Jennifer fought for me. She argued that I was reliable, that I'd saved her life with my structural integrity, that I deserved repairs rather than retirement. The department agreed, and I spent 3 months in a specialized body shop where they straightened my frame, replaced my entire rear suspension, and even gave me a complete paint job. I emerged looking almost new, my Interceptor utility black gleaming under the shop lights. When Jennifer picked me up, I swear I heard relief in her voice as she said, "Welcome back, 847. Let's get back to work." And we did, hitting the streets with renewed purpose, a veteran cop and her rebuilt Charger, ready for whatever came next. By my 10th year, Meadowbrook had changed, and so had policing. The department began equipping us with new technology that transformed me from a simple patrol vehicle into a rolling command center. They installed a new laptop mount with a touchscreen computer that gave officers instant access to databases, mapping systems, and real-time crime information. My interior glowed with the blue light of technology at night, making me feel more spaceship than squad car. Dash cameras and body cameras became standard, recording everything, creating accountability, but also capturing the reality of what we faced on the streets. Jennifer retired after 18 years on the force, leaving to spend more time with her aging parents and to escape the growing stress of a job that seemed to get harder every year. My third partner was Officer David Mitchell, a 26-year-old who represented a new generation of policing. David had a college degree in criminal justice, was trained in de-escalation techniques, and approached situations with a mindset focused on problem-solving rather than pure enforcement. He was also obsessed with technology, constantly updating my computer systems and utilizing every digital tool available. David treated me differently than my previous partners. He saw me as a workspace, arriving early each shift to clean my interior thoroughly, organizing the equipment with military precision. He added a small organizer to my passenger seat where he kept hand sanitizer, protein bars, and incident report templates. He even hung a small air freshener shaped like a badge from my rearview mirror, replacing the utilitarian smell of police work with something vaguely pine-scented. Under David's care, despite my advancing age, I felt maintained and respected. The nature of calls was changing too. We responded to more mental health crises, situations where someone was having a breakdown rather than committing a crime. David would spend hours talking to troubled individuals, using my spotlight to illuminate scenes while he negotiated with someone standing on a bridge or convinced someone in crisis to accept help rather than harm. I became a beacon of help rather than just enforcement, my presence a sign that someone cared enough to respond. We transported more people to hospitals than to jail, a shift that seemed to wear on David differently than traditional police work. But the old dangers remained. Gang violence was escalating in Meadowbrook's south side as rival groups fought over territory and drug markets. We responded to shootings with increasing frequency, and I often arrived at scenes where my flashing lights illuminated tragedy. Young lives ended over petty disputes or stolen respect. David took these hard, and I could sense his growing frustration with a system that seemed to produce the same outcomes regardless of effort. After particularly difficult shifts, he would sit in me for long minutes after we'd returned to the station, just staring through my windshield at nothing, processing horrors that no academy could have prepared him for. My mechanical issues were becoming more frequent. At 180,000 miles, my transmission finally failed completely during a routine patrol, leaving me stranded on the side of the highway with warning lights illuminating my dashboard like a Christmas tree. The replacement transmission was rebuilt rather than new, a cost-saving measure that spoke to budget constraints and my advancing obsolescence. My steering developed a persistent squeak that no amount of lubrication could silence. My air conditioning struggled during summer months, making me a rolling sauna that left officers drenched in sweat. The department discussed replacing me, but newer models were expensive, and I was still functional enough to remain in service, a veteran soldier given extensions because replacements were scarce. David transferred to the Detective Bureau after 4 years together, and I found myself assigned to Officer Robert Bobby Castellano, a 58-year-old veteran counting down to retirement. Bobby had 34 years on the force, had seen everything twice, and approached the job with the weary wisdom of someone who'd survived decades of chaos. We were a perfect match. Two veterans in our final years, carrying scars and experience, no longer trying to save the world, but content to handle our shift and go home intact. Bobby was gentle with me, understanding that I couldn't perform like I did in my youth. He didn't push me into aggressive pursuits, instead using his experience to position us strategically during incidents. He knew that presence and smart tactics often accomplished more than high-speed heroics. We handled our calls efficiently, backed up younger officers who treated us with the respect due to veterans, and spent quiet moments sharing the comfortable silence of two old warriors who'd seen too much to need constant conversation. My body was giving out in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. My odometer passed 200,000 miles, and every one of those miles showed. My engine burned oil, leaving blue smoke in my wake during cold starts. My front suspension was worn enough that I bounced over rough roads like a boat on choppy water. The check engine light became a permanent fixture on my dashboard, illuminating so many codes that the mechanics just cleared them regularly rather than chasing every minor malfunction. My interior was held together with zip ties and determination. Panels cracked from years of equipment being mounted and remounted, the cloth seats worn through in places to expose the foam beneath. But I kept running. Every shift, Bobby would coax me to life, my starter groaning before my engine caught and rumbled its rough idle. We patrolled the familiar streets of Meadowbrook, now showing their age just like us. The old textile mills were being converted to hipster lofts and artisan breweries. The South Side neighborhoods where I'd chased countless suspects were subject to gentrification, pushing the poverty and crime to new areas rather than solving underlying problems. The city had grown around me, changing while I remained constant, a rolling piece of history still serving and protecting. One cold November night, we got a call that would become my last act of heroism. Domestic violence in progress, weapon involved at an address we knew too well. Bobby acknowledged the call with his calm, professional voice, and we rolled toward the scene. As we approached, we could hear screaming from inside the residence. Bobby positioned me in the driveway, using me as cover as he approached the front door. Through the window, I could see a man holding a knife, threatening a woman cowering in the corner while two small children cried in the background. Bobby called for backup, but something in his voice told me he wasn't going to wait. This veteran cop had seen too many victims who didn't survive because help arrived too late. He announced his presence, and chaos erupted. The suspect charged toward the door, and Bobby retreated toward me, drawing his weapon. The suspect burst through the door, knife raised, and Bobby fired twice. Center mass shots that dropped the threat before it could reach him. The suspect fell to the pavement between my headlights, and Bobby immediately began rendering aid while calling for ambulance, his training overriding the adrenaline. The suspect survived and the family was safe, but the incident investigation took months. Bobby was placed on administrative leave while they reviewed the shooting, a standard procedure but one that weighed heavily on the old cop. I sat in the impound lot during this time, surrounded by seized vehicles and wrecks waiting for auction. Without Bobby's regular care, I deteriorated rapidly. My battery died from disuse. Rodents nested in my engine compartment, chewing wiring. A water leak during a winter storm left my interior moldy and rank. I waited in silent darkness, wondering if my career had ended, not with dignity, but with abandonment. 6 months later, Bobby was cleared of any wrongdoing and returned to duty. His first act was retrieving me from impound. When he opened my door and saw my deteriorated condition, he spent an entire day cleaning and repairing me himself, refusing to let me end up like this. He replaced my battery, cleared the rodent damage, scrubbed my interior until the mold was gone. He couldn't fix everything, my mechanical issues were too extensive, but he restored my dignity. We returned to patrol for what would be our final months together. The department had finally approved my replacement, a sleek new 2025 Ford Police Interceptor utility with hybrid powertrains, advanced safety systems, and technology that made my equipment look prehistoric. The new vehicle arrived in April, and I knew my time was ending. Bobby requested one final month with me before transitioning to the new unit, and the department agreed. We spent those last weeks patrolling together, two old veterans taking a victory lap through the city we'd served for so long. Bobby talked to me during those final shifts, something he'd rarely done before. He told me about the cases we'd handled, the lives we'd saved, the dangers we'd survived together. He reminisced about all my previous partners, Marcus, now a lieutenant, Jennifer enjoying retirement in Florida, David thriving as a detective. I'd been part of their stories, a supporting character in hundreds of dramas that had played out in my seats and across the streets of Meadowbrook. Bobby told me that good cops remembered their patrol cars the way soldiers remembered their weapons, as tools that had kept them alive and helped them serve. On my last official day of service, Bobby drove me one final time through every district of the city. We rolled past the apartment where I'd been shot at, the intersection where I'd crashed, the countless street corners where I'd sat with lights flashing while officers handled calls. We visited the old Quick Mart where I'd assisted in my first arrest, now remodeled, but still serving the community. Bobby parked me outside the police station and spent an hour detailing me, washing and waxing my battered body until my Interceptor Utility Black shone like it had years ago. He cleaned my interior, organized my equipment one last time, and even replaced the air freshener. The retirement ceremony was small but meaningful. The chief came out to present Bobby with a commemorative license plate from me, Unit 847, to mark our service together. Other officers I'd worked with over the years stopped by to share stories, laughing about pursuits and close calls, honoring both Bobby's retirement and my decommissioning. They took photos, me and Bobby standing together, a cop and his cruiser at the end of their careers. As the sun set on that final day, Bobby drove me into the garage, parked me in my usual spot, and shut off my engine for the last time. The silence felt heavy, final, but also peaceful. My fate was typical for retired police vehicles. Too many miles and too much wear to be sold to the public, I was auctioned to a demolition derby operator who specialized in retired emergency vehicles. My last act was in a muddy arena, being battered and crashed by a driver who appreciated that I was built tough. I lasted longer than most vehicles in that derby, my police-grade construction absorbing impacts that would have destroyed civilian vehicles. When my engine finally seized and I could move no more, the crowd cheered for the tough old cop car that had given them a good show. In the end, I was crushed and recycled, my steel becoming part of new vehicles, my parts distributed to keep other aging police interceptors running. But my legacy wasn't in my physical form. It was in the officers I'd protected, the suspects I'd helped apprehend, the victims I'd carried to safety, and the quiet nights where my presence alone had been enough to keep the peace. I was Unit 847, a 2015 Ford Police Interceptor Utility, and for nearly 10 years, I'd served with honor, rolled through every street of Meadowbrook, and earned my rest. Every dent told a story. Every mile marked a moment in the ongoing battle between order and chaos, and I'd played my part faithfully until the very end.